Welcome, everyone. It is truly an honor to be here today with you all. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be here with us for this very special live podcast interview, and more importantly, engagement with you all who are here today. Um, I'm Molly Rowan Leach, and I'll be your host alongside and with lead host Logan Ward, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. Wanted to say a few words very briefly so that we can really get into engaging with you and with Tema Okun today about restorative justice on the rise. The point of this platform, which was founded in 2011, is to provide a people's platform worldwide on every continent almost for engagement, for awareness, for practical solutions, and for the power of dialogue. So we are really privileged and honored to continue to do this work thanks to our community of engagement donors as both private and public. And we always welcome you in our live spaces. In order to be connected with us, we want to just encourage you to go to our website and sign up for our e-newsletter, and also to engage us on our social platforms. There's many things going on, obviously, in this movement, and sometimes it's a little hard to stay on top of everything, but we're really excited to engage and to hear from you and to serve alongside and with you. Now, today's conversation with Tema Okun, we're going to be here for an hour and 15 minutes, and give or take maybe a few, but we always like to try and be honoring of your time. And just know that you are a really important part of this conversation today. So thank you for being here again. Instead of going into a full, just reading in front of the screen of Dr. Okun's bio, I would like to make a very personal statement about how I've observed in restorative justice spaces how important the white supremacist characteristics and the antidotes have been to the conversations that I've engaged in and that I've been lucky enough to be a part of worldwide, not just in the US, but in the EU and in other spaces, of course, online. The premise of really being accurate and aware of the truth of our systems and the implications allows us to then really engage in true change. So that's all I want to say. But really, in this restorative justice movement, many of us are doing work within systems. Many of us are doing the brave, tireless work of advocating change from within what might even be called a system of the beast, one that is designed exactly to function the way it's functioning. So I'm just really honored to have you here today, Tema. I want to say a few words about Logan, who is lead host today. Restorative Justice on the Rise is very pleased and very honored to have filmmaker, documentarian Logan Ward as our intern, as well as for this being his first time as a lead host in this space. So Logan's an illustrator, writer, and filmmaker who values dialogue, challenging societal norms, and mutual respect. He graduated with a master's degree in media design in August 2024, where he studied community-centered and participatory approaches to research and design.
Hi, my name is Logan Ward, and in this episode with Dr. Tema Okun, we're relying on the characteristics of her White Supremacy Culture website as a shared framework of how oppression works, which we reference throughout the episode, but can be more fully understood if you visit the writing we're referencing, which is the entire website, whitesupremacyculture.info. On the website, you can find some of the characteristics. Some examples include either or thinking, worship of the written word, objectivity, sense of urgency. There's only one right way. There's a right to comfort for people in power, and perfectionism. And now I will read a brief quote which appears when you enter the characteristics page. White supremacy culture trains us all to internalize attitudes and behaviors that do not serve any of us. A belief that we can be perfect or should be perfect raises the questions: who decides what perfect is? Why would we want to be perfect? Worship of the written word is not in any way associated with the ability to write well. Worship of the written word is a cultural belief that something only has meaning if it is written down, and only if it is written down according to a certain very white standard in a very certain white way. White is in quotation marks. To think we can or should be perfect, to worship the written word, to insist on one right way, to demand comfort when we are causing harm. Any and all of these characteristics on the list are designed to make us forget that we have access to multiple ways of being and knowing, ways that white supremacy has suppressed and oppressed for the purpose of creating confusion about what is important while encouraging us to forget what we already know. They're designed to make us forget that we have access to multiple ways of being and knowing. I love that. It's exactly what I tried to talk about in my documentary, where we have to value subjective experiences. A trans person tells us that they are transgender. Let's believe that. Let's trust that. I just released my documentary a couple of months ago, which covers similar topics, including Julia Serrano's markedness theory, which is a bottom-up approach to activism, similar to Dr. Okun's White Supremacy Culture website, which just basically means that you could use both my documentary and this website as resources to help identify when oppressive structures are leading to disconnection and marginalization based on these ways of viewing people, treating people, as opposed to using specific words that you have to learn all the definitions of, like what are the definitions of heterosexism and what are the definitions of racism. And basically the bottom up is just like, here are some words that non-activists may be more familiar with, such as perfectionism, or in my movie's case, treating someone as mentally incompetent is a form of marginalization if they can't escape that, which Julia Serrano lays out very well.
Basically a complementary method, so it's not one or the other, it's we can do both at the same time. Starts from recognizing how prejudice works. It's as though the group that is marked is viewed as having something that the unmarked group doesn't have.
And these are some of the major themes in my documentary, Remarkable Voices from the Trans Community, which is available on YouTube. So, everyone in positions of power in this podcast episode are white, and therefore, advice given in this episode might only be useful in the context of white people having conversations with other white people. If these situations don't feel relevant, if they do, that's okay. We just hope that you feel that we're truly transparent about where we're all coming from and having this conversation today. The audience, while watching this, we had restorative justice and restorative practice trainers, school administrators and teachers, racial justice advocates, anti-racism advisory team members, HR managers, coaches, mediators, learners, and many more. So this is a global audience, but this episode talks just about white supremacy culture within the context of the United States, and we talk about the American government as well. So this was a really special space where we're all able to grapple with these really tough nitty-gritties for people who are already deeply immersed in this space. But we also hope that if you're new to restorative practice, that you'll check out our previous podcast episodes and follow us on Instagram at RJ on the Rise, as we'll soon be dropping posts that you can share with your close circles to help spread information as far and wide as possible about what restorative justice is and how it can help unify humans in a time of immense polarization. So thank you so much for listening today, and please enjoy.
And Tema, thank you for being here. Tema, excuse me. I'm so used to calling you Tema in all of the sessions that we've discussed your work. It's such an integral foundation to everything that we've been doing, at least for 5 years. And I know that you have a story as to what brought you into this work, and it reaches way much further back than 5 years. So if you'd be willing to start with your story, and then Logan, we're going to bring you in and let you engage and lead us in conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everybody. It's really, really good to be here with you today. In the first days of this administration, I value any time I get to spend with warm-hearted people. So I grew up in North Carolina, which is where I live now. I live in Durham. I grew up in Chapel Hill. My my father was a professor at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in environmental engineering, and my mother worked on and off for the public schools. And I grew up in this upper middle class white family in Chapel Hill, and which is was is very much a liberal town in the state of North Carolina, which at one time was in the South one of the more progressive states, and now is in a deep race to the bottom. But so I grew up, and I grew up in a household where racial justice and racial equity was part of the rhetoric in the household. It's part of what my parents believed. There were a lot of mixed messages, and there was a pretty strong through line of a commitment um, to an admission that that racism existed and that racial justice was an important thing in our culture and society. And then when I started my work life, I ended up working at a place called Grassroots Leadership in Charlotte. And that organization was made up of experienced community organizers who were, our mission was to support community organizing across the South. And I was not hired as an experienced community organizer. I'm not one, but I was hired to do other things, support things in the organization. And what happened was that this was in the early 80s. And a lot of organizations, community-based organizations of all kinds, were coming to us saying, we need help. Racism is tearing us apart. Sexism is tearing us apart. Homophobia is tearing us apart. Can you help us? And we didn't really know what to do. And so my director, a man named Sai Khan, wrote a grant to the Kellogg Foundation, which they funded. I think it was one of the largest grants we'd ever written. And as a result of that grant, we created a project called the Barriers and Bridges Project. And basically, it was a project so that we could learn how to respond to these requests for help. And I was lucky enough to be paired with a man named James Williams, and he and I went all over the country getting whatever training was available at that time. We set up a two-year program, then we repeated it, and we were just learning. It was one of these situations where we were learning. We're definitely making the path by walking. There was not a lot of DEI was not even a thing then. There were not a lot of racial equity programs. We learned a lot from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, based in New Orleans, who I think have served as the grandparents of this work, at least in my lifetime. We learned a lot. In that process, I met a man named Kenneth Jones, who was doing anti-racism work out of the Peace Development Fund in Amherst, Massachusetts. And eventually he and I partnered up, and I worked with him for 12 years until he died way too early. And then we continued working under the name of Dismantling Racism Works. Did that for another 12 or 13 years. Started doing some teaching in college classrooms, which I really loved. And so that's sort of my story. Just that I grew up in this upper middle class white family with a sort of shallow understanding of racism and spoken commitment to racial justice, and then proceeded to find myself in this situation where I just learned a tremendous amount. And in that period, I think we produced a lot of curriculum. A lot of that curriculum and a lot of the work that we produced is available on a site called dismantlingracism.org. And in the late 90s, I wrote this article called White Supremacy Culture, and there's a whole story behind that. Which was part of a workbook. Then Al Gore invented the internet, and somebody put it on the internet, and it started getting a life of its own. So if people have heard my name, often it's because of that article. But basically, I've been doing education, consulting, coaching, mentoring, support for people and communities trying to live into a racial justice commitment, and learning all the time.
And I'm curious, this white supremacy culture article, it's so comprehensive and gets right to the point. I felt like I was able to digest it because of that. This is such a broad topic. And of course, you can go down so many different rabbit holes and memories of interacting with different people. And I think that this is helpful to walk people through the process so that we can really put it to action. So I'm curious, you in the beginning mentioned that it builds upon the work of a bunch of other people. Did you work with any of these people, or how did you collaborate together on this document?
Yes. So by the time that that article came out, at the time I wrote that, and I'll explain a little bit how that happened, but I had been doing, it was the late 90s, so I'd been doing the work for over 15 years. Um, and so I knew some things, and there were a lot of things I still didn't know, which is true today. And um, as I mentioned, when James and I partnered at Grassroots Leadership, we went to trainings by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. So they certainly influenced it. We went to trainings by the Lily Allen Institute in Atlanta, Equity Inc., which no longer exists but was on the West Coast, Crossroads Ministry, which is now the Crossroads Institute. So there were a lot of institutions that we were learning from, definitely. And then just literally the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who came to the workshops that we offered, um, who sort of just learning what people were able to hear, what people weren't able to hear, what how to scaffold a curriculum in order to help people get over whatever feelings might be getting in their way. Um, so, and some of those are named. And then as I was doing this work, I was becoming, the more that you do work in any kind of area with any kind of focus, you start to meet other people doing that work. And a lot of the names of the people that I was in community with are mentioned on the website because those are all people who either directly influenced the work. Before I published the website, I sent it out to, I think, over 30 people to give comments and feedback. So it's sort of like I don't, I see everything I do as collaborative, even if I'm not actually in my body collaborating with people, because there's nothing I know that people before me haven't known, it's like there's nothing. I think there's an expression, there's nothing new under the sun. People have been wise about this for centuries, and part of it is just relearning what people have known. Part of it is learning it for myself in my own body in my own way. So in that way, I've been influenced by all the brilliant people whose work I've read. So everything's a collaborative project in that way. The actual piece, um, I literally wrote it probably in less than an hour, the initial piece. And it came because so I'd been doing this work for a long time. I'd just been to a workshop by the People's Institute, and then I went to some kind of meeting. And I don't even remember the meeting, but the meeting was full of um, microaggressive behavior, just really, it was just a terrible meeting. And I came back, and it's the only experience I've had like this, where I sat down at the computer and it just came through me onto the computer. I didn't sit down and think about it. I didn't research it. It was just like, this meeting was so terrible. Here are all the ways that we are acting that don't help us. And it just kind of came out. Um, and and then once it was out on the piece of paper, I showed it to Sharon Martinez, who was my mentor. She's the one that said, you can't talk about what doesn't work if you don't offer what might work instead, or what does work instead. And that's where the antidotes came from. And then we put it in a workbook. And like I said, then somebody put it on the internet. And then it was being used. But then I think after George Floyd was murdered, it started getting really a lot of use. And that's when I knew it was time to revise it. And that's when the website was created.
It seems like this can be a really helpful article to bring people together to have conversations that are productive and really honest. And so the sense of urgency and the only one right way, these are things that we need to let go of if we want to be able to team build. And sometimes I feel these pressures weighing me down because I'm worried about what people will think of me if I go along with an idea that maybe in my mind, and maybe I have experiences that tell me that it won't pan out in the way that the team is predicting. Or so what would you recommend that I remind myself of in those moments?
Um, this is a really good question, and I wrote down the word discernment. And what I want to say is that if any of this was easy, or if it was like, if I could give, or any of us could give like the 10 points, like this is how we behave, and that's what will create racial equity, we would have done it by now. What you're raising um, is that in lots of situations when a group is trying to make a decision and we think it's a bad decision. So if say the group is heading towards a decision and I think it's a bad decision, I have to sit there and discern, um, is this my ego talking? Is this my fear talking? So one right way is often a result of fear. There's going to be a lot of, in this particular time now, when the Trump administration is coming at us with all these things to deliberately create chaos and to create fear, it makes us more rigid because we have this, and I'm generalizing here, so please know that that's what I'm doing. But often we want, when we're feeling chaotic and fearful, we want an answer. And so so when groups feel urgent is when they often somebody's clinging to one right way because they want it to be okay. So it comes from a good place. They want it to be okay, but they get rigid in a time when we really need to be able to take a breath and be fluid and discern what is my objection to this, and what's my role in facilitating the group to make what seems like a wise decision. And so I think a lot of that, our ability to do that, improves when we are in deep and authentic relationship with the people we're trying to make a decision with. And it becomes a lot harder if it's a recent coalition and we don't have trust. So there are all these ways in which other factors determine how and when these characteristics are going to show up. And part of it, the page on the website that I think a lot of people uh, probably don't look at, which is, I think, the most valuable page, is the racial equity principles page, because that's the page where we offer, and I say we, meaning that page came out of my work with Dismantling Racism Works, 10 ways of being that really help us in these tough moments. And they include things like think and act collectively, uh, honor and build power on the margins. So things to keep in mind when we're feeling very urgent, we're feeling like we have to do it this way, we have to do it this way. It's like, can I be transparent? Can I share with the group, I'm feeling really anxious, so I think we need to do it this way. And then the group might be able to calm me down. Or in some cases, I am seeing something that the group is not seeing. And it's important for me to say, I know we're headed in this direction, but I really need to tell you, um, this is a concern that I have. So when to block a decision, when to go with the decision, those are not always obvious. They are often not obvious. And so part of another racial equity principle is that we need to know ourselves. We need to know what triggers us. We need to know what emotions we're feeling when we're feeling them. We need to know uh, if we're in a good position to actually make a contribution, or if we need to set a boundary. All those things. Yeah.
I love that focus on feelings and really reminding us that it's to be able to let go of that thought of there's only one right way is remembering that if you were to go with multiple ideas, there's each of those would serve a purpose in some way towards our greater goal that we have towards dismantling racism and homophobia. And this, the conversations that need to be had are going to need to be had in many different ways so that many different people can be inspired by them and understand them. So certainly, all of these different ways of approaching the problem need to happen. And uh, there's no reason that we should stop one just because we think one might be slightly more effective. Yeah, like in a probably very small amount of way, maybe. Like you don't know that for sure. So it just sounds like, yeah, focusing on feelings and just really like honing in on how to have better dialogue with people. Um,
So
yeah.
one of the things that I'll say is that a question I like to ask when things get hard is, what would serve connection in this moment? Because what I know about how white supremacy culture operates, how racialized capitalism operates. Again, what we're seeing in the political landscape right now is it's all about disconnecting. It's all about disconnection. There is no, that's it's so it's so amazing to watch Trump and MAGA and the way that they operate. I don't ever hear them talking about what they want to do. What I hear them talking about is what they want to stop, what they want to break down, what they want to get rid of, and it's very demoralizing. And again, some of that's purposeful. So I think that uh, that um, knowing that white supremacy is designed, racialized capitalism are designed to keep us disconnected, sometimes it can be useful for a group to say, what does connection need in this moment? It's a reason that I often, when I'm invited to facilitate meetings or gatherings, I often start with storytelling. Even if there is real urgency or there's a time limit, there's a function, or not a function, there's a way in which giving people time to tell story about who they are, why they're in the room, what really matters to them, then you can spend just 3 minutes a person doing that. There are all kinds of ways to do that without spending a whole lot of time, but it's always time well spent before having to make a hard decision or a challenging decision, because it's about establishing some sense of connection on the way to making a decision.
If
Absolutely.
I also want to say one other thing, which is you said you started by saying this can be a tool that people can use to work together. If you go to the website, you'll see that the whole first page is a caution against weaponizing, because so many people, um, I hear about it. I hear about it too often, that people have been victims of people using the list to go after them, or to use it as a checklist and say, see, here's a website that says you're doing these things, so now you're fired. And that's not what it's. The way you phrased it is what I'm looking for. It's like, how does understanding these characteristics help us work together better, not as a checklist or not as a way to go after people. Yeah.
I, if I may just ask something about that beautiful statement you made about the sense of kind of taking the time for some sense of coherence as a group. Um, Tema, what are your thoughts to honor that as like a global indigenous understanding? Because here's why. Um, you know, it I have so much respect, for example, for the Haudenosaunee process of Thanksgiving and my work with some trackers and medicine elders and people who I continue to learn from, really shared with me some deep teachings and practices around taking that time to honor the earth, to honor our commonalities, and what it does even to the brain. I really feel truly that our indigenous knew this and know this. And I'm curious if you might have a comment about that, because that's what I heard when you just said that.
Well, a couple of things occur to me. One um, is that I feel like a lot of what any of us are doing is uncovering, I would call it uncovering the wisdom of our ancestors. Because again, this culture, Western culture, white supremacy culture, has a very narrow version of what's valuable to know about our history, in a very censored uh, lens, and uh, a lens that supports white supremacy and racialized capitalism, even now with this liberal arts education. So I think uh, all the communities that I'm working with now, all the organizations that I'm involved with now as a member or a member leader, we're all in some ways engaged in uncovering the wisdom of our ancestors, either our movement ancestors or many of us are exploring our own indigeneity. So mine is both Celtic and Jewish. So in both of those traditions, of course, a lot of rituals and ways of being with the earth and rituals and ways of being with each other in terms of storytelling. So absolutely. I think a lot of what we're doing is remembering ways of being with all living beings that have been taken from us, covered up, hidden. Yeah.
So, how do you think that we could make safe spaces without a culture of white supremacy? Uh, we're constantly reading so much in the news, and can you share some ideas with us about how you think the white supremacy culture article could be used and examples of that?
Well, the first thing I want to say, and I'm sure this is on the website somewhere. If it's not on the White Supremacy Culture website, it's on the dismantlingracism.org website. So I would first of all say I don't actually believe in safe spaces. I don't think there's any way we can try and create safer spaces for each other. But a space becomes unsafe as soon as I say something that intentionally or unintentionally makes you go, what? And creates a barrier. And so what makes a space safer in that instance is my ability, your ability, and our collective ability to respond to that moment with transparency and kindness. And again, I don't mean kindness as an erasure, but kindness as compassion for each other. And that is possible only when, not only, but it helps to be in relationship with people over time. And that brings me back to sort of storytelling. One of the activities that so I don't do training that much anymore, but when I was working with Kenneth and then later with Dismantling Racism Works, one of the activities we almost always do in a workshop, it's like the first or second thing we do, is we have people pair up or get in groups of 3 and do an active listening exercise, which means one person speaks and the other person listens. And the 3 questions are, what is your class and ethnic background? What is one thing that's hard for you about that? And what's one thing that's a strength for you about that? So and we say, we're not going to define those terms. There's not a right or wrong way to think about that. Just answer the questions. And the facilitators would usually model first and sort of set a level of vulnerability. And then people would share for 3 minutes each. And just that activity would change everything in the room, because people would share with each other in different levels of vulnerability in their pairs or small groups, and then we'd come back in the large group and we'd debrief what happened. And so that's one way. It's not the only way. So but there's something about the way that includes storytelling, allowing people to say who they are without judgment, not expecting people to show up knowing everything that they're supposed to know. And this, again, is where it gets difficult. So it's like my ability to be in a room with you or your ability to be in a room with me may hinge on my understanding of who you are and or your understanding of who I am. And so maybe you come into the room and you think, oh, well, she's old. She doesn't have anything to offer. And I can sense that, not that you would do that, but I'm just using you as an example. Or somebody does that, and I can sense that. And I'm just going to be sitting there feeling defensive, and maybe it's triggering me and I'm feeling small, or I'm feeling extra, those are the dynamics that can happen. So, or it's like I don't have, I'm a white person and I'm very defensive about the fact that I'm in a racism workshop and somebody's going to call me racist, and I'm scared, and it's like I'm waiting for a shoe to drop, and that energy gets put into the room. And there are people of color in the room, people from the global majority who are like, I don't have time for this. All of that's real, right? So one of the racial equity principles is knowing ourselves, knowing what we're capable of, knowing, can I go to a workshop today? Do I have where I know people are going to be present that aren't able to see me fully? And if I'm not, then maybe today's not the day I go. Maybe I send my friend who is, sort of just knowing what we're capable of at different times and building enough community with other people, that we can feel held um, to be strong when we're not strong. I don't want to, but we feel be held to show up when things are challenging, and be held to show up when we need not to be challenged. So it's a dance, I think, in that way.
Hmm. Yeah. When you said that thing about people, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, sort of this nervousness of what you think someone might say. It sort of reminded me of this sort of like us and them mentality that is perpetuated and also kind of, you know, I think a lot of it for me can sometimes be anxiety, but then I've grown up very sheltered also. So I grew up in Vermont. I um, went to a Unitarian Universalist church. So uh, I've, and then I actually worked as a carpenter for a year. Um, and in that space, I was out as a trans man to my friends, but for the most part could get away with not having to come out to most of my coworkers. And so I suppose in those spaces, I was pretty it was less about anxiety and more there really was going to be another shoe that was going to drop. Um, and so I sort of had to anticipate like this unpredictability, um, and not really wanting to get like too close to anyone in that space. Um, but it's I'm curious, so because we hear a lot of this within the news of this like us and them, and do you think there's a way to um in a dialogue with someone else who maybe has that a mentality of us and them, and I guess I am saying they have it, but I have it too because I'm saying they. So, how can we get rid of that? How can I just listen to another person and feel um, you know, I mean, exactly as you said, there's if they say something that it makes me feel like they're no longer seeing me, I mean, I'm going to struggle with the conversation. Do you think there's a way to uh, deal with that, or should that be a situation where someone else has a conversation with them that maybe they don't have as many personal stakes in it, so that I can feel like I don't have to do all the explaining. Like, what do you think is best practice?
Again, if there was one, I would tell you what it is. I don't think there's one, but I'll give you some thoughts. So first of all, I just want to say I think it's really critically important that each of us have what I call a home base, whoever that is for you. It might be your dog, it might be your cat, it might be your friends, it might be your partner, it might be your parents, it might be your siblings, but people who um, know you, uh, love you, hold you just as you are. So that without that, I think this becomes so much harder. And so if you have that, wonderful, and just nurture it. And if you don't yet have it, look for it and find it. And you can. There are always other people who are going through whatever it is that you're going through. So having a home base from which to operate seems to me to be really, when people say, well, you're just preaching to the choir, I go, great, great. Let's get this choir in full tune. And once this choir is tight, then we can go out and recruit some new members. It's like, just want to make sure the choir's together. So that's one. The other is that um, I think uh, I think so. I just use myself as an example, which again, I'm not trying to generalize for myself, but just in case my story is helpful. When I first started doing this work with Kenneth in particular, he, an African American man, it was interesting. His name was Kenneth Jones, and my name is Tema Okun. And this was before the internet. We would show up, and people would expect me to be the black person and him to be the white person, but it was the opposite. And he he was my senior and my mentor, and he instructed me that I was going to be leading white affinity groups, or white caucuses, which I had never done before. And I didn't really want to do, because at that stage in my development, I felt like the way that I'm a good white person is I'm in a room with Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and I'm proving to them I'm not like other white people. I'm a good white person. And I can't do that if I'm in a room with only white people. But he told me to do it, so I had to do it, and I did what he told me. And I didn't quite know why I was there, because it was sort of I stumbled around. And then after a year or two, I understood why I was there, but I was there with a very righteous attitude, like, um, I'm white too, but I'm a trainer and I do racial equity work and I know what I'm doing. And you need to prove to me, other white people, that you got it, that you understand it, that you're as with it as I am. So very self-righteous and very distancing and not very effective. And I stayed in that stage way too long. And then finally, I understood that I was just on a path, like every white person is on a path, trying to undo my racist conditioning, that I had more experience than some people and less experience than other people. And I was doing some things well and some things terribly. And my role, my gift, my joy was to work with other white people to understand that our racist conditioning does not serve us, and that we want to be free. And once I was in that place, I was able to, I now can say honestly to you that I feel like I can work with any white person that is struggling around racism. Maybe not effectively, but I'm open to it, is what I would say. Here's my other identity, is I'm a Jew. I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, which means I'm a Jew who thinks that what Israel's doing is absolutely appalling. And I have not yet reached, what I know is that I am not effective with other Jews who are supporting what Israel's doing, because I am so angry and I am so distressed and I am so angry. I can't even barely talk about it, that I cannot be effective. Um, I can't listen. I cannot listen to any other Jewish person justifying what Israel, I can't listen to it. Now I have a Palestinian godson. I spend a lot of time in Palestine. So I'm not the person that you want in the room trying to move other Jews to understand our stake in stopping the genocide in Israel, the genocide that Israel's doing. So, so part of it is knowing yourself, knowing what can I do? What can I do? What am I ready to do? I want to get to that place. I'm not happy that I'm stuck here as a Jew. It's not helpful to the movement. It's not helpful to the Palestinians that I love. So I want to move. I just know I'm getting there. I'm closer to it than I was a year ago. And so there are roles that I can play. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. There are roles that I can play in Palestine solidarity work, but moving other Jews is not one of them, not yet. So I think that, I mean, I think we just have to understand where are we? What are we capable of? What do we need to move more? What's our commitment to moving more? And yeah, I think that would be my answer to that. Yeah.
Hmm. Logan, I just want to thank you, by the way, for being the lead host today and just honor you. Um, Such an extraordinary young man, and I'm really blessed, and we all are, to have you with us today. And Tema, thank you so much as well. And now we want to turn to you, to all of you. Thank you to those of you that asked questions previously at the RSVP. There's one that talks about carceral systems. Tema, how does your work apply to residents and staff within carceral systems?
I'm not sure I have a good specific answer for that. I think that the work, the work around white supremacy culture, um, is helpful on what I think of as three levels. So there's the personal, interpersonal level, like how does understanding, let me back up for a minute. One one of the things, my joke is I know five things for sure at any given moment, and 5 minutes from now, two of them will be different. But one of the things I feel like I consistently know for sure is that if we want, if we are going to engage in what I call movement work, justice work, and restorative justice work, um, there are three things that are really, really helpful. One is to have a shared framework about how oppression works, which helps us understand how liberation works. So on these websites that dismantlingracism.org is the framework that we use for understanding oppression as being personal, institutional, cultural, and spiritual. So I think that understanding how white supremacy culture works on a personal level, how it's because it's conditioned the way I think, it conditions the way I respond to my feelings, it conditions the way that my body moves through space, it conditions the way my relationship to spirit. So knowing that, if I don't know that, I can never be free. I can't know that on my own. I only know that by being in relationship with all of you and getting feedback about what does and doesn't serve connection. I remember when I was very, very early, even before the Berries and Bridges project started, the first project, the anti-racist project that I was on, my boss, Cy, called me and asked me if I was coming to a meeting, a staff meeting. And I said, yeah. He said, well, I don't want you to come if you can't come with a good attitude. I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, you come to the meetings and all you do is point out what's wrong and you bring down the morale of the group. And I think I cursed and hung up and said, I'm not coming. But then I thought about what he said. And I didn't know I was doing that. I didn't know that I would show up and just like a gun, just go about all the things that were wrong. I just thought that's what people did. I didn't know critical skill was a choice. I thought it was a way of life. Critical thinking was a choice. I thought it was a way of life. And I certainly didn't know I had the power to bring down the morale of a group. So it was such a valuable feedback. And I've thanked him for it many times because um, without that, I would not be who I am today. Then I started understanding that my inner voice was just critical all the time. I didn't know how to befriend myself. So I think it has to do with like what's our understanding of the ways in which we've been conditioned by our culture is important. And then how does it affect the culture of the organizations or the communities that we're part of? How is it showing up in our culture? And then how's it showing up in our institutions? How's it showing up in our spirit? So I think it just becomes a, a, a shared framework, which is one of the things that I think we need. It's a way to help us understand what's not working, and then help us to think about what do we need and what kind of culture do we want? What kind of culture serves connection? How do we want to be with each other? How do I want to be with myself? How do I want to be with the earth? So it just offers a lens and a way of seeing that can be supportive as we're trying to get free from our conditioning and collectively and collaboratively live into ways of being that serve love, that serve our mutual care and concern for each other and all living things. I mean, to me, it's such a, um, and the evidence of this, I don't know if people saw the picture of, I think it was Musk and Zuckerberg and Bezos, all of them standing in a line at the inauguration. And, what we're seeing is the logical consequence of white supremacy, racialized capitalism, because what we've got is very, 4 or 5 white wealthy men, or maybe one of them's not white, but 4 or 5 incredibly wealthy men sort of dictating the culture, the institutions, the way that we think about what's important. It's like we organize the culture to serve these 4 or 5 men. It's ridiculous. I mean, if you just even, it's just ridiculous. It makes no sense to have a economic, cultural arrangement that serves the economic interests of 4 or 5 people. And yet that's what we're doing. And so what would it look like to have an economic and cultural and spiritual and embodied way of being that serves mutual care and concern and serves our ability to be, um, serves our capacity to love ourselves and each other? So I think I think we're being invited into this moment of truth, this moment of choice. And so, my interest is in how we can be with each other to do the latter. That's what I want to learn how to do with all of you, and anybody who wants to.
Who's in on that one? I know I am. I'm just honoring everybody that's here again. And Catherine, on that note, Tema, Catherine is curious to know your thoughts about productive coping strategies. And I know you've already touched on these, but would you be willing to share a bit more to her question? Um,
Sure.
Productive coping strategies in response to the recent presidential executive orders that
Yeah.
affect all of our communities.
So I think it's a great question, and I think it's a question, Catherine, that you should ask anywhere and everywhere you go, because I think we should all be talking about how are we going to help each other through this. Um, the answer I'm going to give has to do with my mother, and I hope I don't freak anyone out with the story, but I'm going to tell it, and I'm going to tell it. So my mother and I had a very challenging relationship when she was alive, and it wasn't until after she died that I was able to get enough distance to understand why she was the way she was and sort of all the challenges that she was dealing with and how and to really develop some empathy for how she was raising children here in this southern liberal college town without any help. My father was working all the time, and she grew up poor and almost working class and in this upper class anyway. So I just started to have like, oh, now I understand why she was so depressed, why she was so bitter, why. I mean, she could have made different choices, but I understand why I have better understanding for her. And about 6 or 7 years after she died, I was walking, and this had never happened to me before. So it's going to be a little woo-woo, but I'm going to tell you. So I'm walking, um, and I hear her voice very clearly say, Tema, I have instructions for you. And I'm going, what? Okay. I'm looking around, but it's very clear. And I go, okay, what are they? And she said, there are four of them. I said, okay, what are they? One is to be loved and be loved, which was so ironic because she didn't know how to do that in her life. So somehow she had figured that out. The second one was to pay attention, which is a great instruction. The third was don't be afraid, also a great instruction. And the fourth, and probably most valuable or so valuable, was find the others. And so that's how I would answer your question. It's like be love or whatever love is for you. Like be kind, be compassionate, be all the things that we're not seeing coming from our leaders right now. Be kind and generous and loving. Pay attention so that you can notice not just what's broken, but also notice all the miracles that are offered to us every day. Um, let's not be afraid. I mean, feel the fear. We're going to be afraid. It's not we can't get rid of fear, but it's like be in a friendly relationship with fear. It's like, oh, I'm afraid. What can I do right now? Do I get a cup of cocoa? Do I go talk to a friend? Let's not be captured by our fear. And then find the others. Find everybody else who cares about this world and the direction we're going and wants to have a world that makes sense and that's just. And knowing that our ability to be happy and joyful just increases exponentially when we're all happy and joyful and that we're all in this together. So that would be my answer. And I think there are lots and lots of answers. And I think that's a great question to just keep asking. And then coming up with your own answers and offering those to people.
And I'd love to, oh, sorry.
One last thing, I feel like because I'm older now, I'm just much more aware of both my need for care and nurture and also my capacity to offer care and nurture and just sort of living in that duality more and more.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I want to just add to that too that I've this needing to find the others, uh, being a part of online groups and also attending groups with other trans people has been so healing for me in this time. And if you know of any trans people, if we have any trans people here, please join groups, be a part of conversation with other trans people, and of course, just yeah, being with people who know what you're going through and that they'll get it. And I mean, it's just like so powerful in a way that it feels especially special to someone who it doesn't have many trans people like physically in my life. Online we can connect, but there aren't a ton of us. So yeah,
It's one huge advantage of the internet, I think.
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But those of us who are in the crosshairs of this administration, so I'm privileged to be parts of lots of conversations of people who are being targeted, and the leadership is very clear that what you're saying, Logan, is so important that we find each other, we stick together, we have each other's back. We might have disagreements behind closed doors, but we're going to present a unified front, um, and all of that. Yeah, so important. That's what I mean by home base. Find your home base, other people who can love you just as you are. You don't need to change.
And Tema, I'd love to just kind of pop the bubble on one of the questions that is always with me in restorative justice and practices spaces specifically, but is probably universal, really. I think maybe you tell me, or we can talk about this. And we've already touched on it a bit, and it really has to do with kind of that dystopian feeling of being in a bubble of this system that is perpetuating itself, and that acknowledging that it's not what it's purported to be. Is that the first step to actually changing it? And how many of us are actually in that dystopian delusion still in reality? Or is it just those five privileged men that you described earlier?
Because they only have the power they do because so many people are going along with it. I think so, and I feel like I started to say this and I didn't complete my thought, which is that one of the things I think, one of the ways I would answer that is that, and one of the reasons that I helped to facilitate workshops as long as I did was because, in my experience, it's really helpful when people have a shared framework for how oppression and liberation work, shared language, so that when we're using words like racism and white supremacy, we mean the same thing, and then shared history, like we understand how we got here. I think, uh, again, using my example of Israel, the the a lot of the dissonance comes because people don't know or have such a bad understanding of the history of that region, um, and are so misinformed. So I think one of the things that we're up against right now is how misinformed people are, because how the places where people get their information are run by people who are not interested in actually telling the truth or telling stories of people that they don't want the stories told about. So I think I think there's a difference. This is another thing that my mother taught me, which is there's a difference between those of us who have the information that we need to know better and those of us who don't. So there are, and so and I think that informs our strategy. And my belief from my mentor Sharon Martinez, who's the one who said I had to include antidotes in the article. Her other major mantra was each one, reach one, teach one, which sort of using organizing mind, so that it's not my goal. And I'll use Jews again, I think Jews who are under the delusion that what Israel's doing keeps us safe. I think that's a huge delusion. And so my goal is not to go and try and uh, move the leader of APAC or the leader of the Anti-Defamation League. My goal is to find people who are disturbed, don't quite know why they're disturbed, don't have language for it yet, are certainly not willing to identify as anti-Zionist, and to um, and to be present in a way that allows them to see what they may not have been able to see or hold before. It's not what we're inviting people to do, which is to see how toxic this culture is. Like, who wants to see that? It's not, it's not, it's not a particularly inviting invitation. Once we start to see that, I remember So I used to teach this framework in college classrooms at UNC Greensboro, where I got my doctorate. And UNC Greensboro was a historically white nursing and teaching college in the university in the UNC system. And a lot of the students coming were first generation in their family to come to college. And I tell you that for a little bit of context, but I'm teaching this about this framework of how racism and other oppressions operate. And at the end of a class, this young white woman was sitting in the back of the room crying. I thought, oh, what have I done? And so I went back and I said, can I sit and talk with you? Yes. And, what's happening for you? And she said, well, I really believe what you're teaching, but if I believe what you're teaching, I can't go home. So we're asking people, and that was not my experience. If my parents didn't understand what I was doing, they supported it. Um, and so I didn't have the experience now of that wasn't the case in terms of my politics around Palestine with my in-laws when I was married. But for the most part, my positions were supported. But for a lot of people, asking them to come into a space and understand that whiteness isn't serving them, or that Zionism isn't serving them, or that, four men richer than God isn't serving them, we're asking them to completely shatter the way that they understand the world. Um, and and so it's a lot. I think it's a lot. Um, and so I just think we need to honor that and make space for people to tell their stories, um, and for us, again, we have to be the ones who are ready and to hear where they are, to meet people where they are, so that they can feel that they're accepted as they are before we ask them to do something different. I don't ever respond well to somebody coming at me like, you have to think differently about this. You're not thinking right about it. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not about thoughts all that much either. It's mostly about feelings.
Mm. Thank you so much. The inherent connection between your work and restorative justice practices.
Yeah.
Wow. And I apologize for it taking us so long to invite you into the fold with our community here. I mean, like, it's just more timely than ever, perhaps. And maybe it's just right. I think it is, you know. There's another question that has come in, if I may. Uh, and I'm not sure if the person wants to be named or not, but they'll let me know. Um, Tema, what are some strategies to help folks with introspection to assess where they are and readiness to engage constructive anti-racism work, gauge self-awareness? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I would love to know more about this question. What immediately comes to mind is one of the racial equity principles, which I love so much. I use at least one every day. And this one is take risks, make mistakes, and learn from our mistakes. And so I don't know if I'm answering the question, but it's what came to mind, which is that, yes, we need to do our personal work. And my teacher, I have a man named Lamarad Owens, he's a Buddhist, is one of my teachers. And he says we have to do our own work or we become work for others, which is so true. And so we have to do our work. And we can't wait until we're perfect, whatever that is, because there is no such thing, to do our work. So I think more than anything is it's your desire, your inner desire, to 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 show up in the world in a way that is a model for, or is just saying to the world, here's another person who's trying to show up in love, or use your own language. That's my language. Is trying to show up in justice, is trying to show up um, for a just world. And I think we can't, however you do that, we cannot underestimate, particularly now, the power of that. The power of that. And I remember the first time somebody used the word love out loud in a social justice space. It was like, oh, we can say that. And and she wasn't doing anything special. She was just speaking her truth. And it really changed my life. And so, particularly now in a culture that is being imposed on us that is really destructive and really hateful and really, mean-spirited, to show up with kindness and open-heartedness and love and care is huge. And then if we do it with each other, even huger. So mostly it's just about your readiness, knowing that Maurice Mitchell, who's a brilliant leader of Working Families Party, says to us, to white people, he's African American man, our anxiety about getting it right, those of us who are white, our anxiety about getting it right has nothing to do with my liberation, right? Which just means that, and I remember talking to my white colleague, Suzanne Plissick, when we were trainers at Dismantling Racism work, because we were having some internal issues around race. And I went to her and I said, how can we be doing workshops on racial equity if we have our own issues? And she said, well, we could wait till we don't ever have any issues, but then we'll never, ever offer the work. That you do them simultaneously, like this is all happening. And in doing them, we learn. It's sort of like we don't learn or get an aha, and then it's not sequential like that. It's like it's all happening and informing each other all at once. It's very holistic in that way. And we're helped and supported in all of that by being in community with other people who are doing that. So the quote from Lama Rod was, if we don't do our work, we become work for others. And you should check him out. He's awesome. Lama Rod Owens. He has two great books. One's called Love and Rage. So if you deal with a lot of rage, it's beautiful. And one's called The New Saints, where he's talking about who we need to be in this time. Or anxiety to get it right. Oh, Maurice Mitchell's quote was, talking to white people, saying, your anxiety about getting it right has nothing to do with my liberation.
Mm.
He's just trying to say, you can't, you're not going to get it perfect. Just, don't do rash things, like be thoughtful, but know you're going to make mistakes, make them, learn from them. The only real mistake, it's true, is just not learning from our mistakes, which our culture is excellent at not learning from our mistakes. So creating a culture where you try things, and then say, how did that go? What did we learn from it? That's also huge. You also reminded me, if people haven't seen it, Kamayu Bell on Substack, if you're on Substack, published a really beautiful article about Elon Musk and the Nazi salute, which I just got a lot out of it, because his attitude, his way of thinking about what's happening, I found very helpful. Because it wasn't exactly, it was akin to compassionate. But it just turned it a few degrees in a way that I thought, oh, this is a useful way to think about it. So as an example.
Tema, you shared something about, your experience with your mother that was extraordinary. And I'd like to link back to that for a moment in some way or another, as far as just to see the idea that perhaps it's a privilege to receive another's wound, or like, while we're not taking it personally, what if it was a privilege to sit with the wound? What if we had that position? You talked about being in a home base. I love that. Home base can be internal too. Like, what if our home base is willing to sit with the wound and consider it in that way, instead of, pushing it away, or like, the fragility aspect of things.
I think, and again, we just have to know whether we're capable of that.
Yeah.
Some moments I am, and some moments I'm not. And I would also say the other thing I know for sure is that, again, this is my position about myself. I'm not going to get rid of any aspect of myself. What I can do is shift my relationship. So I'm never going to get rid of fear. I'm never going to get rid of my racist conditioning. I'm never going to get rid of things. Um, I can change my relationship to those things, and I can bring a more loving presence to them, and that's what actually shifts them. When I try and pretend they're not happening, it's like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel it. And it just grabs on even more strongly. Oh, here it comes again. Okay, feel it all the way through. And then see what does it want to tell me? Why is it here? So it's sort of like I talk to myself a lot. I have lots of conversations with all the voices in my head.
Well, I know we have a lot of questions, and probably we'll walk away from this time. and reflect and probably have more. And so thank you for being willing to share your email like you did. And there will be a follow-up to everybody that registered for today's session. This will go out on our podcast. But I'd like to invite Logan, if you have a concluding question or thought, so that we can wrap this up today as promised within the time frame. And just an idea that perhaps there's something that maybe you might consider, Tema, in coming back with us at another time in the near future to continue the conversation. Um, it just seems so relevant right now, and just want to honor everybody that took time out of their day today to be here with us. So back to you, Logan.
I really enjoyed this conversation and the presence that I feel like I felt during the conversation as well. Just really feeling because of the storytelling between us and the connectedness of this conversation really helped me digest everything better and remember it. And I just feel that that's a really important point for holding these conversations. And so, I mean, Tema, I think you're partially responsible for helping create that space in a positive way. So I really appreciate that. Um, yeah.
Well, thank you all, and I appreciate being here. And I just know we all, need each other, and let's continue to
Mm,
support and show up for each other.
mhm.
They can take a lot of things. They can't take the ways that we choose to show up for each other.
And especially with the encroachment too of AI, let us keep our organic heart and keep the love alive. And it's very appropriate in social justice spaces. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Logan. Thank you so much. Bowing to you, Logan, and to you, Tema. Restorative Justice on the Rise is here for you. Public platform. Please suggest future guests if you wish. And hopefully, we might be able to entice you back at some point, Tema, for another conversation. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, restorativejusticeontherise.org. Thank you, everyone. It's been a privilege and honor.